We find it, this phrase socialized medicine, which I know is supposed to scare people off, is regarded as a right. I mean, people feel incredibly strongly that this is something that was introduced in 1945. It isn't perfect, but it is inconceivable that any politician would want to do away with it. So we just can't understand the fear and loathing and hatred that it engenders.
How about the rationing under the health service? Here, insurance companies say no. There, if you're in the health system, and I realize some people get private care, does the government say yes or no?
Well, there are debates about certain kinds of medicines that are very expensive or too experimental, or whose benefits have not yet been proven. But there are not the British papers are not full every day of stories about rationing. It's a very expensive service to run. It costs a lot in taxes. But if you had any poll of the British people, they would overwhelmingly support it.
My guest is the editor of the Guardian newspaper of Britain. Am I saying your name right? Alan Rusbridger?
You got it right.
Great. And we can take some phone calls for him. I don't want to make this about health care in the United States, folks. We've been talking about that endlessly forever. But let's compare some things in politics and journalism, and we will talk about journalism in this conversation too, between the U.S. and U.K., or anything you want to ask the editor of The Guardian. Maybe you read The Guardian, 212-433, WNYC, 433-9692. You talked about increasing polarization along the question of the size of government. Debt, of course, is an issue with Greece imploding and the possibility that bigger countries in Europe like Spain may not be far behind. The rest of the Eurozone is agonizing over how much to bail them out. Britain is not in the Euro system. Does The Guardian, as a liberal voice, have a rooting interest in how that turns out?
Well, I think we're broadly in favor of Europe and as a countervailing balance to the states, and we're broadly what you might call a Keynesian follow of Keynesian economics. So we thought that the fiscal rescue was a good thing. Whether enough money has trickled down into businesses as opposed to getting stuck in the banking system is a moot point. But I think there are great dangers in slashing taxation and trying to shrink the size of the state at the moment. I think the fiscal rescue is not robust enough yet. And I think there are dangers that by taking measures that would increase unemployment, you could have dangerous social instability of the sort that you're getting in other countries in Europe.
Well, many Americans look at the European welfare states, and the Americans say, now that is unsustainable. The population is aging faster in Europe, meaning more retirees per tax-paying worker. Economic growth is more sluggish, almost by design. Unemployment is higher. And the benefits everyone gets are more generous. Aren't those debt chickens going to come home to roost big time and burst Europe's social democratic bubble eventually?
Well, I don't think there's one European social model. So Scandinavia, it works just fine. Go to a country like Norway, it is incredibly stable. They've really got their finances worked out. Germany has a much more long-term view. They've still got industry and localized systems of banking and finance that aren't so short-term. I think one of the problems the UK is in trouble was that we became too dependent on the financial services industry, and that I think is more the problem than necessarily the burden of spending on the state.
I see that big in your paper today are the election campaign manifestos from the Labor and Conservative parties, the equivalent of our Democratic Republican parties. The Conservative manifesto under candidate David Cameron suggests California-style voter referenda on issues. If the advocates of an issue could get just 5% support to start out, then it gets on the ballot. Are they suggesting national referenda on everything from tax rates to abortion rights?
I think it's not terribly worked out yet. I think it's a powerful populist idea, and I think the Conservatives have some interesting ideas about devolution and trying to return power away from the centre. But I think this idea of referenda probably is one of those things that crops up in manifestos as a semi-worked out idea, but needs to be fleshed out.
You, of course, have question time, the rough and tumble questioning of the Prime Minister by other members of Parliament. It was such a big deal here in the U.S. when President Obama recently took questions from Republican lawmakers, and now there is a demand question time movement. I don't know if you've heard of that, springing up among some advocates of open government here. What purpose does question time serve, in your opinion?
Well, the worst bit of it is that it's very yaboo, lots of noise, shouting, point scoring. I think there is a benefit in getting the Prime Minister to appear once a week in front of elected representatives and holding him or her to account. And if you speak to Prime Ministers about it, they don't like it, but they say it really, once a week you have to be absolutely on top of your brief, on top of all the facts, and be prepared to defend it in front of 600 MPs, half of whom are going to be very hostile. So I think it's a sort of a weekly democratic reality check, which is quite useful.
Do you think it serves to polarize Britons against one another, or perhaps to vent polarization and not let it take as deep root in the people? Or is it irrelevant to that?
I think it's probably relevant to that. I mean, there is something about the House of Commons which is, I think lots of people find a turn-off because of it. It's a polarized atmosphere, and it feels like a 19th century institution. So I think there are reforms that are necessary there. But I would have thought it would, in the context of the states, if you could find something that wasn't nakedly partisan and aggressive, as in Britain, it would have some purpose.
So you also have ranters like this, British representative to the European Parliament, Nigel Farage, is that how you say his name?
Yeah.
Addressing the President of the European Parliament to his face in a kind of question time on meth.
You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you?
So how emblematic is he of the level of discourse over there?
Well, I suppose he would be the nearest thing to the Tea Party in the UK. And he speaks for an anti-European populist style of politics, which has a constituency, but it's a tiny splinter in terms of mainstream politics. It's a tiny splinter act, and because of the two-party nature of the British politics, it's never going to be more than that.